Okay, so the first thing that we're going to want to do if we want to write JavaScript within a page is implement script tags. Now, there are lots of different ways that we can actually introduce JavaScript into a page. We have an inline way of writing code, and this is usually based on event handlers. So we'll take a look at the three different ways that we can actually write JavaScript, and we'll explain why inline code isn't very good, and we'll explain why perhaps just script tags aren't very good, and then we'll look at the benefits of loading in external files that we've included JavaScript on. So let's go ahead and take a look at our page structure. So if you're not quite used to HTML, this will help in terms of the structure of your page. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to code up a very basic structure to this page. So I'm going to include a doc type, an HTML5 doc type, an opening and closing HTML tag, a head, and a body. Now in the head, I'm going to go ahead and just introduce a title here, and I'm just going to call this JavaScript. Okay, so now all of the JavaScript code that we write isn't going to go in the head. You might have typically found that in the past you'd have seen JavaScript code being placed in the head of the page. Now sometimes this is necessary, but most of the time you want your JavaScript to load after the markup on your page has loaded. Now that doesn't mean implementing your JavaScript down here, it means implementing your JavaScript at the very end of the body. So let's just say we have some body content. I'll just go ahead and place a paragraph in here. This is a web page. So let's go ahead and take a look at this in the browser. You can see that the title of the document has changed, and you can see that this paragraph element has been implemented onto the page. Now let's go ahead and introduce a link here as well. Okay, so I'm going to set the href to hash. Now the first thing that we're going to take a look at in this video is how we implement JavaScript inline. Now just before I start, this is not the way to go ahead and write JavaScript. You may have seen this before if you've come across little snippets of code, and it looks something like this. So let's say we want the user to click on this link and it pop up an alert. So I'm going to go ahead and type onClick equals, and then I'm going to say this is called an attribute, and this is saying that everything inside of here will be run when this element is clicked, and everything inside of here is JavaScript code. So let's go ahead now and type in alert, and then we'll go ahead and type in what we want to alert. So you clicked me. So what's happening here is the element will be loaded onto the page like this. When I click it, you'll see that the JavaScript code is run within that block. Now there are several reasons why this isn't the best way to go ahead and write code. Let's say you wanted a fair few things to happen when you click this link. Now you could solve this with the use of a function, which we'll be looking at later, but what you're actually doing is you're introducing clutter onto your page. Now when you write markup, you should be writing markup to separate the markup from, first of all, the presentation, which will be your CSS styles, and secondly, separate it from your logic, your application code, so your JavaScript, because that's the code that runs within the browser. So you want to try and separate this content as much as possible. By doing this, you're mixing it up. It's exactly the equivalent of using things like the style element to go ahead and say you want the color of this paragraph to be red, for example. So it's exactly the same concept as mixing CSS styles in with your markup, which you don't want to do. Now, not only does this clutter your page and make it hard for developers to work on, the second thing is that you're actually introducing a slower page load time. And in this case, this would be, unnoticeable. And in usual cases, it's unnoticeable. But what you're doing here is you're loading your entire page along with your JavaScript. And what this is doing is it's introducing more code for the page to load as it renders the HTML. So what's happening here is we're loading down the page. We hit this bit here. Instead of just rendering a link, which we should be doing, and then setting out event handler, which is this on-click thing here later on, we're actually going ahead and we are we're loading the JavaScript along with the markup, so it's slowing down the page load time, particularly if you've got a lot of information here. Now some people might argue, well, I could just go ahead and introduce a function here, so say hello for example, and we would define the function lower down our page. There's still no point in doing this, because what you're doing is you're cluttering your markup, you're mixing your presentation or your markup with your logic, and it's again introducing more markup for the page to load. So we don't tend to do it this way. So now that we've got the web page back to its standard thing, this click me doesn't do anything, but what we can do is down here we can introduce things called script tags, and this is just an opening script tag and a closing script tag, and all of our code goes in between these tags. So for example, we could target this element and we could go ahead and we could set an event handler and alert something out. Now for now, all I'm going to do is just create an alert down here instead of going through the process of teaching event handlers. We'll be looking at that later on. When I refresh the page, you see that we get hello. Now the important thing to note here is what's actually happened is the entire page has loaded, so the markup has been loaded, then the JavaScript kicks in. So the JavaScript kicks in at the end, and this helps because it allows the markup to be loaded and then event handlers to be bound and anything else that you need your application to do. Now that's the second way of doing things, but what is actually happening here is you are including this on this page, which isn't allowing this code here to be cached. Now let's say you had quite a large amount of code that you wanted to put inside this script tag. Well, it would make sense to go ahead and separate it. So once that file's been downloaded, when you visit that page again, the file is cached, so it's basically stored in the browser's cache, ready to just be used again rather than downloaded again by the server. And what this does is it saves, first of all, the user having to download the file again and again and again, or rather just have it on the page and download all this extra code. And it also allows the server not to have to serve this file again, because the browser won't be requesting it. It's already cached. There's no change to the file. So what we're going to do now is we're going to include the same code here, but I'm going to go ahead and modify these script tags slightly. And by doing that, I'm just going to say script source equals and then something. Now what I'm going to go ahead and do is create a new file with the code in here. So I'm going to go and type hello. Now there's no reason at all to include script tags like this within this external file. You do not need to do this at all. The reason you don't need to do this is because what's happening is this code is being sort of implemented within this script, so you don't need to do that. So this file, I'm going to go ahead and save it. I'm going to go ahead and create a new folder just to store all of my JavaScript files in, and I'm going to call this alert.js. So what I'm going to do is head over to my index.html page, and I'm going to choose the file location that I want to include, which is js/alert.js. Now what's happened is we're achieving exactly the same effect, but what we're doing is we're externally loading in a file. And we can check this by bringing up the developer console within Chrome, or if you're using a browser like Firefox, it will be Firebug or Firefox's developer tools. And you can see here that when we refresh, we still get this, and then you'll see that within the body here, we've got this external script file. Now, if we head over to the network tab, you can see that we've got this alert.js file, and if we click on it, we can get a preview of this, and it's loaded in, so we can see the preview of it. Now what happens if I want to go ahead and refresh again? You can see here that we get a 304 status back, not modified. And this basically means that this hasn't had to be downloaded again from the server. So like I was talking about earlier, this file hasn't been modified, so it's cached within the browser. So whenever we refresh, we get this not modified here. Now what happens if I go ahead and I change this to hello there? When I go ahead and refresh now, you'll see that this says OK, because this file has had to be downloaded again, and we saw just a moment ago there the alert with the new text in. And what this means is that the browser has seen that the file needed to be re-downloaded. It was changed, the file size had changed, or something had changed, and it needed to be re-downloaded. So it re-downloaded the file, and then it gave us the new hello there alert. And again, this is not modified now. So it's useful to understand how this works and how the different types of script tags work. The general rule is do not use inline code. There's no need to use inline code in the majority, 99.9% of circumstances. Avoid using script tags just plonked on the page and writing code out. Always separate your code into external files, and if you can, try and include them all in one file. You might find that things tend to get messy if you had lots of different scripts down the page with files all doing different jobs. Now, the benefits of this are you could separate them into different pages. So one page might just have its own specific JavaScript. Another page might have JavaScript specific to that. You might have a general primary JavaScript script that works for all sort of everywhere on your site. So you might have maybe a primary one and then a page specific one. You might even want to go ahead and have a single file that's automatically generated when you launch your site. So it might combine all of your JavaScript dependencies into one file. That's not too much to worry about now, because if you're learning, you just want to go ahead and write the code. That's absolutely fine. But for now, it's a good idea to understand that the script tags should be included at the bottom of your page, and they should be included externally. Now, there are some circumstances where you need to include code at the top of the page. And a good example is, for example, Google Analytics. Now, what this is it's analytics software provided by Google that allows you to track visitor information to your website. And the reason this snippet of code needs to be included at the head, it will be something like this. So script, and then you'll have the code within here, is because when the user lands on the page, Google needs to start the script off straight away to start doing things on the page for things like the time a user's been on the page. So it's critical that that code is loaded first. And you might find that when you're developing a site, you have code that needs to be run first. But in the majority of cases, if your code can be run at the bottom, your markup can be run first. Always do it that way. It will speed up the load time of a page for a user, and it provides a much better experience.